First, just walk me through, as I've sort of gone through each of the campaigns with our viewers before, what is your strategy to the nomination, right? You got to get X number of delegates. How in are you on, say, Iowa as a must-do really well state?
Well, look, I think I'm set up pretty well going into those early states. I think I need to exceed expectations in those two states. And the good news is because everybody else has been spending tons of money on airwaves, but actually have not so far. That's changing now. We're going to be in a position to beat expectations in Iowa and New Hampshire. Top three in both those states, I think will automatically exceed those expectations. And then that puts me in a position to ultimately get to the nomination, because pretty soon, Sean, I think this is going to come down to two America First candidates. I mean, there's no other way in the Republican nomination for somebody who's coming from the Dick Cheney ghost of the past that they're trying to prop up in the form of, pick your favorite puppet of choice. I think that the right path forward is going to be an America First candidate. And then we'll have a real choice that the voters face. Do you want an America First leader from the last generation? Yes, who has experience, who's tried and true, who I respect, that's Donald Trump. Or do you want an America First leader that can lead the next generation with fresh legs, reuniting the next generation of Americans, reviving national pride? And I think that'll be a choice for the voters.
So
if Trump's the nominee, I'll support him, and I expect the same if I'm the nominee as well.
Right, and I just want to make sure I'm not putting words in your mouth. If you don't get in the top three in Iowa and New Hampshire, you don't see a viable path forward. Is that an accurate reflection of what you've said?
I think we need to be in the top three in one of those two states. I think that that's absolutely fair. But in either of those cases, we will significantly shatter the expectations for an outsider like me coming in, especially relative to how much super PAC money is propping up the other candidates. I'm not supported at that same level if you just look at the numbers. And so the fact that that will be grassroots driven in my case, just me, the hundreds of thousands of small dollar supporters and voters across this country lifting that up, yes, that alone will then give us the momentum to then go the distance after that.
So in the first debate, I woke up the next morning and you were trending everywhere online. And I think not only online, but the Today Show, Good Morning America, I was flipping through the channels. They were all talking about your performance then. Likewise, you got a lot of attention after that third debate. But when I look at both the polls nationally, which I don't put a lot of stock in, just so we're clear, but the Iowa polls right now have you at about 4.7%. Based on the performance that you've had and the reaction that you've had online, where do you think, or do you think there is a disconnect between the polling and what you're seeing on the ground in Iowa and New Hampshire?
Huge disconnect. Actually, most of the people who are coming to our events and in our network say they haven't participated in an Iowa caucus for a very long time, if ever at all. They don't get polled, okay? So I think that, again, is another reason why we're going to be in a position to deliver a big positive surprise that will shock the system. And I think that's on track to happening. People they call, are a lot of them for those landline surveys, are people who still have landlines sitting at home, aren't actually being reached by the way that I'm mostly reaching people, which isn't through cable news advertisements, but through new media, through actual direct grassroots events and otherwise. So I think we're going to be in a position to over-deliver expectations. We're exactly where we want to be in some sense, Sean.
Okay.
As one of the guys who's running Iowa for me is the guy who ran Rick Santorum's state efforts, and another one of our guys on our team ran his national campaign. Santorum was behind where I am right now in the same time at Thanksgiving as of that time. He was polling less than where I am now. He won the Iowa caucus. Now, in Rick's case, he didn't have independent resources to be able to go further, and so he wasn't ready for that success. We will be, but I think that's the kind of race we're going to run.
So you have talked about at the last debate, you called out Ronna McDaniel. You've called the RNC corrupt. What do you want to see happen at the national party? And why, of all the things that you've talked about, because you've gone after woke capital, you've gone after China, why focus on the party, if you will? Do you think that there's enough resonance there in terms of what voters want to hear about? Or do you think that that's, because that seems to be a shift from you from policy?
Well, I think you said it, Sean, as of all the people I've gone after, I go after everybody 360 degrees. I mean, on that same debate stage, I called for Biden to step aside as the nominee because I think it's dishonest. He's not going to be the nominee. Tell the truth. I called out, probably in a way that no Republican candidate has, I called out Kristen Welker from NBC News to her face. I turned the question back on her, told her to answer for lying about the Trump-Russia collusion hoax that never was. So I'm unsparing across the board, woke corporations on down. China and otherwise, I'm 360 degrees honest. But what I'm not going to do is somehow spare the failures in the managerial class of the Republican Party because that's not speaking the truth. And so included in that list for me is accountability within the Republican Party. I'm against affirmative action. I'm the hardest line conservative who has said I would end affirmative action because I believe in meritocracy. The best person should get the job. How can I possibly preach that to the rest of this country when it is glaringly obvious that we don't put the best person in the job to run our own party? Ronna McDaniel taken over in 2017. We lose in 2018, 2020, disaster in 2022 and 2023. And yet that's still the same person who's in charge, whose salary has tripled in the meantime over that period. Give me a break. So unlike other candidates, and it's worth people understanding this, I was the only person on that stage or off that stage who's willing to take actual filters off to speak the truth 360 degrees about the likes of Ronna McDaniel and the RNC leadership. It's the truth. Our grassroots base can see it. It's telling that I'm the only person who's actually willing to step up and say it. And so I do think that that adds something valuable here for someone of a different generation coming in. It's why I'm in this race. And I do think that it's not that I'm focused only on her, Sean. To the contrary, I would be a hypocrite if I'm talking about everything else I'm talking about, holding everybody else accountable while playing with kid gloves with the RNC, and I'm not going to do that.
So Tim Scott dropped out this week, Mike Pence just before that. Is your campaign in any way making a play for those voters? And if so, what's the message?
My message is for all voters, right? So I'm not playing the game of political snakes and ladders. My message is that it's going to take someone from the outside with fresh legs that's able to reach the next generation of Americans. That's the hard truth. And I'm the only candidate in this race who can do that. For a long time, the Republican Party has been running from something. Now is our moment to actually start running to something. I'm an America First conservative. I'm all in for America First. But to put America first, we have to rediscover what America is. What are those founding ideals? Meritocracy, free speech, open debate, self-governance over aristocracy, the rule of law. That's why I've said I would use our own military to seal our own borders. And I say that as the kid of legal immigrants to this country. That's not racist. That's not xenophobic. That's what it means to be an American.
Yeah, I want to touch on policy for a second. In an effort to rein in government, you've talked about on day one or day two, cutting the size of the federal workforce by basically saying to everybody who's got, I just want to get this right, if your Social Security number ends in an odd number, they would lose their job. First and foremost, what does your Social Security number end in?
Well, this would be for all unelected bureaucrats. And actually, I wanted to be, and I just picked it at random. Mine ends in an odd number. But it's anybody who's unelected, who is not elected to their position, because that's not accountable to the people. And Sean, I want to explain to people, this isn't a glib proposal, actually. This comes from a deep understanding of the laws. Every Republican president who's ever run has always talked about reining in the size of the federal bureaucracy, firing federal bureaucrats. Never happens. Not even a little bit. Why? They tell them the civil service rules. I mean, this is what stopped Trump. So what stopped even Reagan. They say the civil service rules stop you from firing federal bureaucrats. Those rules provide all kinds of legal bases for those federal bureaucrats to sue, to say it was because of political retaliation, political retribution, political motivations of an elected president, or violating civil rights laws if there's disparate impact of people of one race or gender disproportionately being impacted. You'd spend years in court. And I understand why Reagan or Trump couldn't see that through. But if we're serious, now the federal bureaucracy is bigger than it's ever been. It's going to take some level of extreme action. So by using randomness, the law of large numbers in our favor, we actually avoid the civil service rules altogether. And so, yes, I think that's what it's going to take, Sean, an executive coming from the outside who's been a CEO. I've been a CEO. I've built multi-billion-dollar businesses. I know that if somebody works for you and you can't fire them, that means they don't work for you. It means you work for them because you're responsible for what they're doing without any authority to change it. But it's going to take somebody coming in from the outside as a CEO, but also somebody who understands the law and the Constitution and uses that in our favor to get this done. And so any candidate who steps up and says that is offering some sort of idea that isn't extreme, that means they're not going to get the job done because the task ahead of us is an extreme task.
But don't you worry.
And so that's the kind of leader we need.
I get that. But you are a businessman, right? You ran a company. And I thought to myself, okay, I get this. I am a huge fan of the ideas, the thinking of how to just fundamentally reshape the size of government. It's way too bloated. Yeah. It's inefficient. I'm all for it. But my point is that when you take a scalpel like that and just go in and go, you don't know. Are you throwing out everybody who runs the data protection?
So I'll address that.
Okay.
I'll address that, Sean, because there's no way a company would have ever gotten to that state because companies aren't bound by civil service protections. Companies actually operate according to a budget. They can't just print money like the government does to make up for its proliferating cancer. So now we've gotten past the zone of what would ever exist in the private sector. It's what you call the law of large numbers. At the end of the day, I can give you with 100% clarity. On day two, if on day one, we just have 50% of the federal employees, they're gone. On day two, not a thing is going to break. Not a thing will be different. It's not the job of the federal government to provide workforce opportunities. Those people can find honest work in the private sector. And that's just step one. After we use the chainsaw, it's a chisel from there. I think the top performers should be paid more than they are now. The bottom performers should be paid less. Many of those employees in Washington, D.C. should be spread across the country to other parts of the nation so they're more accountable to the people. I think that there should be 8-year term limits for most of those positions. There's an 8-year term limit for me as the next president. I think that's a good thing. Well, I think that 8-year term limit should also apply to the people who report into me. So that's just the first step of many changes. But the reality is, Sean, anybody who says that they're going to incrementally tinker around the edges is lying.
Right.
They're lying to themselves in many cases. They may think that they're making a promise. It's a promise they can't keep, and it's why not a single Republican president for 40 years has gotten a darn thing done when it comes to reining in the size of the federal bureaucracy.
I understand.
So yes, it will take the law of large numbers working in our favor. 50% reduction. Let's start with that on day one. Then you can get your arms around it. Then you bring the chisel after you start with the chainsaw.